the apartment across the fire escape. The first snow of the season coincided with Ava's newfound habit of sleeping with her windows open. It began as an experiment, a baptism by ice into the New York way of life. Fresh from Queens, she arrived in August, a wide-eyed 20-year-old college freshman, her skin still damp from the summer heat and her heart brimming with naive hope. 2 years spent working at her parents' bakery had afforded her just enough savings to momentarily suspend the reality that Manhattan was hardly an affordable place to exist. Her East Village studio wasn't a studio at all, more like a walk-in closet with delusions of grandeur, featuring a sink, a temperamental radiator, and a window barely large enough to accommodate a particularly tenacious pigeon. The lease optimistically described the building as pre-war and charming, a dreamer just like her. By November, Ava had discovered that the key to unlocking a sense of spaciousness was to simply invite the cold inside and gaslight herself into believing it was fresh air. And so, she propped the window open with a paperback, allowing winter's initial, hesitant flurries to drift in. After a summer defined by the relentless city symphony, the buzzing of the bodega down the block, and the midnight motorcycle serenades, the silence was astonishing. The snowfall transformed the night into a serene seashell interior, its sharp edges softened. It was while perched on the windowsill, chin resting on her hand, that she first noticed the woman across the fire escape. The building mirroring hers across the narrow air shaft was a study in urban uniformity, brick, grit, and stoic facades. The opposite window radiated a warm amber glow, revealing a woman standing barefoot at a small table, engrossed in what seemed like a sacred ritual. Somewhere between her late 30s and early 40s, she possessed a quiet confidence, the kind Ava associated with individuals who had truly come to terms with themselves. Her dark hair was bluntly cut at shoulder length, and a long cardigan draped around her like a comforting robe. Ava watched as she meticulously sealed jar after jar, lining them up along the window ledge like a collection of miniature sunsets. The woman glanced up once, a fleeting moment, and Ava recoiled, nearly sending her tea and a precarious stack of syllabi tumbling. She slept with the window firmly shut that night. The following evening, emboldened by the city's crowded anonymity and the memory of the amber-glow woman's genuine smile, crooked, amused, and deeply personal, Ava braved another peek. Without thinking, she raised a hand in a tentative wave, more for her own benefit than anyone else's. The woman responded by lifting one of her jars in a mock toast. Mortified, Ava retreated back into her haven of thrift store blankets. Days accumulated, blurring into a routine. The window transformed into a makeshift porch, a liminal space where the city could breathe on her and where she could indulge in the fantasy of having neighbors in the way suburban characters did in books. The woman kept unusual hours, sometimes working in the early morning, sometimes late at night, her activities slowly revealing a discernible pattern to Ava. Some days involved simmering pots and swirling steam, others were dedicated to slicing and stitching, or whispering into a recorder and playing it back. During long stretches, the woman would simply sit, eyes closed and hands relaxed, as if patiently waiting to catch whatever fleeting inspiration the city might release. Ava began to notice small details. The woman sprinkled salt on her grapefruit. She always used a knife to cut flowers, never scissors. When she laughed, she pressed her mouth into her shoulder. Her favorite color seemed to be navy blue. And she didn't appear to be married, at least not from what Ava could gather across the air shaft. There were no extra toothbrushes in her bathroom, no additional pairs of shoes lined up like obedient punctuation marks near the door. Their first conversation was prompted by a plant. One Tuesday, amidst the scent of burnt sugar permeating the air, Ava was attempting to nurse a pothose back to health on her windowsill. She had purchased the plant from the farmer's market under the mistaken impression that plants intrinsically desired to live, but it had since been behaving like a melodramatic Victorian heroine, constantly fainting and demanding attention. She had resorted to moving it around the room, hoping a change of scenery might offer a solution. Lost in her task, tongue poking from the corner of her mouth, the woman at the opposite window suddenly pushed up her sash and called out, "Too much water." Ava jumped. "What?" The woman pointed, her hand hovering for a reckless moment over the thin air separating their buildings, as if she could reach across and correct Ava's mistake herself. "You're drowning it." Ava tilted the pot, releasing a muddy stream of brown water into the sink. "How do you know it's not thirsty?" "It's complaining with its leaves." The woman tilted her head, mimicking the plant's drooping posture. "You need to let it get a little hungry. The roots get lazy if you give them everything." Ava snorted, a sound she had never made in front of anyone except her brothers. "I could have used that advice in high school." The woman grinned. Up close, if airshaft close counted as close, there were delicate parentheses of smile lines around her mouth, and a faint scar bisected her left eyebrow, hinting at a story Ava couldn't decipher. "I'm Harper," she said, as if it mattered to be known next to a pot hose that had only ever been called the plant. "Ava." She touched the glass, though it offered no warmth. "Thanks for the rescue." That night, Ava slept with the window open, the pot hose positioned like a silent witness. When it leaned toward Harper's side of the airshaft the next morning, she decided it was a sign, though of what, she couldn't quite say. They developed a rhythm, a way of being neighbors within the constraints of the city's detached indifference. They exchanged weather updates and traded half-hearted complaints about the radiator's capricious behavior. At 2 a.m, when Ava's mind refused to quiet down, she would open the window and find Harper at her table, meticulously coaxing ink from a fountain pen. They traded books using a repurposed paint bucket clipped to the fire escape with a laundry pin. Harper shared Clarice Lispector and James Baldwin. Ava offered the raw tenderness of Ocean Vuong. Harper taught Ava the secret to warding off fruit flies: clove oil, a drop on a sponge. It smells like baking, and Ava showed Harper how to use her phone to filter blue light after 9. It will change your life, or at least your headaches. Their conversations revolved around small domestic enchantments, but also danced around something deeper, a silent acknowledgement of the unspoken. Ava learned that Harper crafted perfumes. Not the celebrity-endorsed kind with vapid names like Radiance or Myth, but hand-blended concoctions that evoked the first slice of an orange in winter, or the essence of a library, or the hushed anticipation behind a theater curtain just before it rises. She bottled them in the clear jars Ava had seen, each labeled with her precise handwriting. She sold some at a boutique that pretentiously referred to itself as a curated shop, and wore others herself, subtle olfactory weather systems she adjusted according to her mood and the season. She called them companion scents, which, after Ava confessed she had never worn perfume because she didn't want to feel like a borrowed version of herself, prompted Harper to tilt her head thoughtfully and ask, "Who would you smell like if you only smelled like yourself?" Flustered, Ava blurted out, "Coffee and laundry," and then, after a pause, "and the green part of strawberries." Harper laughed into her shoulder. "I know exactly what you mean." They learned each other by accident. That was the city's strange gift to Ava, the way it allowed you to sidle into intimacy without being accused of overstepping. At her parents' house, love was always a boisterous, obligatory feast. Here, love could be a jar lowered across a fire escape, assuming love wasn't too grandiose a word for the tender care they extended to each other. Winter settled into January, heavy and still. Ava recalibrated her routes around the city, meticulously mapping her class schedule to the buildings with the least offensive radiators. She worked 2 nights a week at the library circulation desk, becoming familiar with the faces of the students who haunted the stacks. She even started writing a paper about the language of the city's unofficial signage, the handwritten notes declaring, "Do not pee here, we will find you," and "If your dog barks after 11, so will this note." She indulged in the pretense that it qualified as anthropology. Harper's work, while fulfilling, struck Ava as lonely at times, though Harper never explicitly said so. She dedicated her days to training her nose with small amber bottles, cedar, bergamot, coumarin, inhaling with a focused intensity that resembled prayer. "When I was a kid, I thought I'd become a perfumer in Gras," she confessed to Ava one night, a wry smile playing on her lips. "Then I realized what I really craved was a space where I could listen to things no one else had heard yet." "You could have been a musician," Ava suggested. "I was," Harper replied with a shrug, perhaps only half in jest. For a while, they deliberately avoided asking each other about the individuals who had previously occupied those windows. For Ava, there had been a boy in early October who had briefly made her feel like a dangerous version of herself until she realized he was simply dangerous. For Harper, there had been something else, an absence Ava recognized by the shape it carved in her room, by the way Harper had, on the first deceptively warm day in March, opened every jar in her apartment and inhaled deeply as if returning from a prolonged drought. It was that night of the false spring that everything irrevocably shifted. The city had won every year, or so the seasoned New Yorkers told Ava. A day in March when the temperature soared unexpectedly, prompting everyone to flock outside, exposing their ankles to the sun and renewing their faith in the impossible. Ava finished her late shift at the library and rode the wave of jubilant strangers through the streets back to her building. She should have gone to bed. Instead, she climbed out onto the fire escape, carrying the bucket and a bottle of wine concealed in a paper bag, and called out, "Emergency consult," toward Harper's window. Harper appeared almost instantly, armed with two mismatched cups and a sweater she hadn't bothered to put on properly. She settled down on her side of the fire escape, leaning against the brick wall, and extended one of the cups across the narrow divide. Ava carefully poured the wine, its aroma of cherries filling the air. "Emergency," Ava repeated, savoring the weight of the word. "What kind?" "Academic." Ava adopted a theatrical tone. "I have to choose a topic for the final essay in urban forms, and my brain is a complete wasteland. Give me the instructions." Ava complied, reading aloud from the blurry photo she'd taken in class. The professor wanted a rigorous engagement with the built environment, a phrase Ava had been mockingly dissecting for 2 days to mask her intimidation. Her voice trailed off. The city hummed. Somewhere 3 blocks away, someone was playing the trumpet like an apology, while elsewhere a couple had stumbled upon the perfect shared joke. "Smell," Harper said after a moment.
"What?"
"Write about smell as an urban form," she said, as if it were self-evident. "The city is a map of odors spread." Said "I love you" in the deli, and meant it. Hot metal on subway brakes. Rain on concrete. Cheap candles. You could walk from 14th Street to Houston with your eyes closed and know exactly where you were if you paid attention to the air. Ava stared at her, stunned. "You could. You could too," Harper countered, and somehow the "you" felt like a benediction. "You already do. You notice everything." Ava felt a flush spread across her skin, unrelated to the false spring warmth. "You think?" Harper offered that small, precise smile. "I wouldn't say it if I didn't." And so Ava wrote about smell. She followed her nose for a week, a diary tucked in her pocket, pausing on street corners to sniff the air like a well-mannered canine. The paper surprised her by being both easy and joyful. When she read the final paragraph aloud to Harper, a passage about the city's unspoken agreement, its plea for forgiveness for its discordant notes in exchange for appreciation of the overall harmony, Harper leaned back, closed her eyes, and murmured, "Yes," as if someone had finally tuned a stubborn string. It should have remained a friendship fostered through the window, a connection they were ideally suited for. This next-door loyalty, this ritual involving the bucket and the comfortable silences, in which neither felt pressured to perform. But spring is not a patient season, and the city is not a patient city. One Sunday, bathed in an endless expanse of blue, the building's boiler gave up the ghost. It didn't literally explode, but rather coughed a final sigh and died like a weary old priest, setting off a chain reaction of breakdowns. The super was in Connecticut. The electrician was entangled in the woes of another building. Everyone else had decided that this was a day for brunch, an opinion that proved unshakable. Ava, raised by individuals who viewed broken machinery as an invitation to innovate, lasted precisely 1 hour before she found herself in the basement, confronting a chaotic mass of pipes and gauges as if her sheer willpower could magically restore them to working order. "Don't touch," Harper said, materializing at her side like a guardian angel. Her hair was pulled back, and she wore a paint-splattered shirt that evoked images of nights spent under other windows. It became unbearable that they should each face the cold alone. "Come over," Ava blurted out, the words escaping her before the typically responsible parts of her brain could grant permission. "I have a kettle. We can cheat." And so they cheated. They carried pots of boiling water down the hall like contraband, taking turns pouring them into the tub of Ava's tiny bathroom, their legs aching from the repeated trips. Steam enveloped the mirror, enveloping her modest apartment in damp warmth, and when Harper laughed, the sound intertwined with it like ribbon at a child's birthday party. "You first," Ava offered, but Harper shook her head, already reaching for another pot. Ava understood and refrained from imposing the formalities of a different kind of neighborliness onto this moment. When the tub was finally full enough, Harper shut off the tap and tested the water with a tentative touch, the same way she tested perfume on her skin. "Perfect," she declared, and then, as if stating an undeniable law of physics and not posing a question at all, "We should both get in." Ava blinked. The air had transformed into a perfume in itself, metal, citrus, and the green promise of her inexpensive shampoo. She watched her hands go through the motions of wrapping a towel around her hair, stalling for time, performing a small ballet with the shower curtain. "Unless you're uncomfortable," Harper said softly. "I'm not," Ava replied, a statement that was both entirely true and encompassed everything. They undressed with the awkwardness of individuals who hadn't rehearsed the scene, sparing each other the theatrics with jokes and a poorly timed exclamation over the courageous pothose leaf that had, in the steam, unfurled like a welcoming hand. The tub enveloped them like a shared secret. There was a bump that resolved into a knee, a curl of hair that provided a place to hide a hand, a line of water tracing a collarbone that Ava suddenly longed to taste more than anything sweet. Harper sighed with what sounded like relief, leaned back against her knees, and said, "It's like childhood but better," then laughed at herself for saying it, and Ava fell in love. There was nothing overtly sexual in the tub, only the stark honesty of proximity. They didn't kiss, they didn't need to. Harper closed her eyes, and Ava watched her. Ava closed her eyes, and Harper watched her. When the water cooled, they reheated another kettle, and then another, until the city remembered them and sent the super back from Connecticut, and the boiler groaned back into a crude imitation of life. They ate toast on the floor in their bathrobes, butter pooling and jam sticking to their fingers. Harper recounted a story about learning to ride a bike at 32 because a woman she loved had wanted to ride alongside her. She had fallen in front of a deli, and the owner had emerged and offered her a popsicle, praising her bravery. "Are you still in touch?" Ava asked later, as the daylight faded into evening. "No," Harper replied simply. "She wanted something I didn't know how to be then. And now?" Harper tilted her head, considering. "Now I know how to say what I want." Ava swallowed. "What do you want?" Her voice remained steady. She had been taught to look people in the eye. Harper leaned forward, as if the space between them had snagged like fabric on a nail and needed to be freed. She reached out and tucked a damp curl behind Ava's ear, a gesture usually reserved for mothers and lovers, and for a moment, she embodied both, seeing the girl and the woman, and the bridge connecting them. "Dinner," she said, and then, seeing Ava's mouth open, smiled and added, "With you. Tomorrow. The restaurant on the corner with the blue door." Ava laughed, because she had been holding her heart out like an offering and hadn't known whether she would need to set it down gently or fling it into the air. "Yes," she said, conveying her assent to the way Harper spoke of tomorrow as a promise and not a threat. They went to the blue door, which wasn't simply a color but a mood. The restaurant was one of the city's small miracles, a former barbershop that still carried a faint scent of talc beneath the aroma of garlic. They sat near the window, their shoulders almost touching, taking turns using the flashlight on their phones to decipher the menu as if reciting incantations. "You live here," Ava blurted out once the food had revived her. It sounded both like an accusation and a declaration of wonder. "You really live here." "So do you," Harper countered. "I'm learning," Ava admitted. "Sometimes I feel like I'm just visiting the life of a girl who already knew how to do this." Harper's expression softened. "I met her," she said. "She lives across the fire escape." She notices everything. She keeps plants alive even when they don't want to be kept. She writes about a place like it's a person, which is the only way to do it. Ava couldn't think of anything to say that would be both clever and genuine, so she reached for Harper's hand instead. Harper intertwined their fingers, like a shared understanding. When the server brought dessert, he placed the spoon between them with a flourish, and Harper said, "Do you want to tell him, or should I?" "Tell him what?" "That we don't need the spoon," she said. "We can share." They walked home like tourists rediscovering their own lives. On their block, a saxophone player had unearthed a new piece of night and was attempting to teach it to anyone willing to listen. The snow that had melted during the afternoon had decided to become evening ice, turning the sidewalk into a series of miniature essays on balance. Ava took Harper's arm, and Harper didn't let go even when she didn't need to. "Should we go up the fire escape?" Ava asked, standing beneath the glow of their building's front light, intoxicated by proximity and the rare sensation of uncomplicated desire. Harper glanced up. "It would be very cinematic," she said gravely. "It would," Ava agreed, before pushing open the front door and taking the stairs like a pair of pragmatic romantics, which was exactly what they were. The first kiss didn't happen at the window. That would have been too contrived. It occurred in Ava's kitchen, which was less a kitchen and more a countertop, a hot plate, and a sink that clung to its self-belief despite all evidence to the contrary. Ava had accidentally burned a piece of garlic bread and uttered a word she was certain Harper never used, and Harper had laughed into her shoulder. Ava turned her head into the laugh and found Harper's mouth. It was a cautious kiss, neither a question nor a definitive statement, smelling of butter, basil, and a faint hint of steam. Harper stepped forward half an inch, and Ava stepped back half an inch, somehow maintaining the exact same distance between them. "Okay," Harper said after a long pause, her voice low, surprised and delighted. "Okay," Ava echoed, and then they were laughing because the word had become too small to contain the immensity of what they meant. They didn't become a cautionary tale or an inspirational meme. Instead, they forged the kind of relationship that the city, in its reluctant generosity, sometimes permits, specific and real. They coordinated domestic responsibilities with the precision of professional negotiators. On Mondays, Ava cooked. On Tuesdays, Harper taught her how to cook rice without using a measuring cup. On Wednesdays, they ate in the narrow space of a hallway where they could feel the vibrations from the neighbor's base and imagine it was their own. They kept the windows open even when it was cold. The pot hose thrived. There were minor sorrows. The city preserved them in amber, preventing them from pretending they were exceptions to the rule. Ava's classmates made crude jokes about cougar stereotypes, then offered belated apologies. Harper's father called and said carefully, as if reciting someone else's lines, "It's unexpected," and Harper held the phone like a seashell and replied, "Yes, it is. Isn't it wonderful?" The building's gossip network, fueled by cigarettes and stairwell whispers, speculated about whether they were serious, a designation that shifted according to the whims of the observer. There were larger sorrows, too, unrelated to age or onlookers. Harper carried a past that didn't knock before entering the room. Nights when she couldn't sleep and sat at her table inhaling bergamot as if it were oxygen. Mornings when she walked for an hour before uttering a single word. Ava had her own burdens, low tides of doubt when the city felt like an insurmountable challenge she had foolishly accepted. They learned when to uplift each other and when to simply sit on the floor and watch the kettle. Spring solidified and summer cautiously approached. Harper, with the help of a friend who owned a truck that smelled of pine and maintenance supplies, borrowed it and drove them out to Fort Tilden one Sunday. They walked until the beach was only a rumor. Then Harper produced a small bottle from her pocket. On the label, she had written Ava, followed by East 3rd Street in rain in smaller letters, and then, like a message for a future version of herself, first warm night in March. Ava dabbed it on her wrists, inhaling a distillation of her own life, coffee, laundry, the green tang of strawberries, the metal of the fire escape, and the courage they had created together. Harper, ever the thoughtful one, gently broke the silence. "Smell is memory," she murmured, carefully tucking the bottle back into her pocket. Ava, her mind racing, questioned. So, if we lose our memories, this can help us find them again? That's the hope, Harper replied, shielding her eyes as she watched the gulls battling the wind's whims. More than that, I wanted you to have something that says, I see you, not be this. Ava glanced at her hands, a silent inventory of the selves she had once tried on, only to discard. Thank you, she managed, the words feeling inadequate compared to the emotions swirling within her. Yet words were all humans had. As always, the city tested them. September brought an unexpected opportunity for Ava, a fellowship that included a semester in Paris and an essay topic that felt almost divinely inspired. She carried the email like a precious relic, a letter from a distant ancestor, holding back from showing Harper for 3 long days, like a child hesitant to unwrap a fragile gift. Finally, she shared it. Harper read it once, then again. Before looking up, her smile tinged with a bravery it was still learning to possess. You have to go. I don't want to go, Ava confessed, the statement both an overstatement and profoundly true. She desired the experience, the way a bird feels the instinctive pull of flight, testing its wings against the boundless sky. But she also dreaded leaving the home that had unexpectedly blossomed in the city, like moss clinging to a north-facing stone. You have to go, Harper reiterated, her voice softer this time. And then you have to come back or not, but either way, you have to go. Ava wept, a raw, unfiltered release she had allowed herself to embrace. Harper held her, abandoning the well-worn script of reassurances. She didn't utter empty promises like, we'll be fine or we'll make it work, understanding that the future was not a pet to be tamed. She avoided the trap of claiming to know exactly what would unfold. Instead, she offered simply, I will love you through it. Love? Ava echoed, then laughed self-consciously, realizing she had known the word for months, cautiously waiting for someone else to utter it first, afraid of mispronouncing its weight. Love, Harper affirmed, with the same meticulousness she used when labeling her jars. The weeks leading up to Ava's departure were spent meticulously preserving their lives in tangible forms, handwritten notes, carefully filled jars, treasure recipes, and a practice of asking questions that didn't demand immediate answers. Ava asked Harper to teach her the rice recipe again, and Harper obliged, guiding her gently, as if they were enacting a ritual far deeper than a simple dinner. Harper, in turn, asked Ava to share her essay paragraphs as they took shape, allowing the city's unique scent to infuse sentences that might one day resonate with others. On the eve of the flight, they slept with the windows wide open, allowing the crisp, bustling energy of the city's autumn to seep into their room. At 3 a.m, during that liminal space between night and dawn when the world holds its breath, a light drizzle began to fall. Ava woke and reached for the scent bottle on her nightstand. She gently pressed her wrist to Harper's nose. Harper smiled in her sleep. In the morning, their farewells were not staged in dramatic locations. They exchanged them in the hallway, where the light always managed to be unexpectedly kinder than remembered, and then again on the stairs, as a neighbor squeezed past with laundry, nodding as if witnessing the most ordinary of sacred rituals, which, in a way, it was. On the street, Harper framed Ava's face with her hands and delivered a kiss that spoke volumes. They lingered just long enough for honesty to permeate the moment. Paris has awful coffee, Harper finally said, breaking the tension with something trivial to avoid dissolving into tears. Please lower your standards temporarily. I refuse, Ava retorted playfully, then climbed into the cab, understanding that sometimes love meant prioritizing the higher standard of personal growth over the comfort of familiar routines, even coffee. Paris revealed itself in all its complexity. The city, in its own way, had already prepared a jar labeled Ava upon her arrival. It wasn't a superior city or an inferior one, merely a different kind of teacher. She discovered that the green part of strawberries shared a connection with the scent of coins on her palm after buying bread. She learned that missing a familiar landmark didn't prevent her from moving forward. She learned to craft love letters that were not desperate pleas, but heartfelt records of her experiences. Harper responded, not with lengthy paragraphs or contrived displays of distance, but with quotes from her current reads and poignant details from her daily life. The pothose is arrogant now. It has invented a new verb, and a man on the bus smelled like pencil shavings, and I forgave him for everything. When Ava returned home in January, New York didn't feign having waited for her. It greeted her at the airport with its signature winter wind, sharp as unsolicited advice. On East 3rd Street, the bodega had changed ownership. The saxophone player had shaved his beard. Ava climbed the stairs, her suitcase bumping against her leg, her heart a frantic percussion instrument. Reaching her door, she set down her bag and gave a single, familiar knock on the window with the ridiculous old bucket. Harper's face materialized in the window's glow, like a beloved tale the city had decided to retell. She pushed open her window, and Ava opened hers, allowing the night to drift in like a trusted companion. Somewhere within the apartment, the pothose plant stretched its leaves towards the seam of air that whispered their names. There were no grand declarations. They simply allowed the city to breathe around them. They reached across the small space that might one day hold a bridge and touched hands. Later, after the kettle had whistled its welcome, after the sharing of new jars and familiar jokes, after the kiss that held the patience of a generously narrated story, Ava inquired, "Will you show me what you've been making?" Harper led her to the table. A new line of labels was neatly arranged, her handwriting sharper and more defined, as if the semester apart had subtly altered her wrist's grammar. Ava read them like recipes for capturing fleeting moments. First snow by open window, basement steam, blue door garlic, fire escape in sun, East 3rd Street in rain. Pick one, Harper offered. Without hesitation, Ava reached for the jar labeled returning. She dabbed it on her wrists, closed her eyes, and summoned the courage to be fully present in that moment. The scent arose like a memory that had chosen to become a gift, airplane blanket and winter sweater, and the comforting essence of a person who had become synonymous with a place. "Is it right?" Harper asked, her voice not laced with worry, but with a palpable alertness. Ava smiled without opening her eyes, allowing the city, the woman, and the space between them to converge, as if smell possessed the power of a spell, not just science. "It smells," she breathed, "like home."